Now we can, I don't also like to talk over the head of anybody either, because obviously this is 14 years just in the public working with spiritual, occult, and esoteric knowledge. So for me, it would be a little bit different than the standard person, because the time that they spend even at work, I spend that time reading through something and connecting things. That's why we all work together, because then I can just tell you what I know and I can bring you up to speed. And you will have to trust that, well, shoot, he's going to obviously be a little bit more exact because he has the time to spend in it. So that's how we used to do it in ancient times. We would technically pay somebody to go out to the woods and don't contact anybody and just keep getting stronger spiritually. We would take care of them and let them do their thing, especially if they showed they had an affinity for it, because these beings were, of course, very, very valuable. Because now, if you think about what I was saying before earlier about a type 3 civilization, what is it, or type 2, what is it to communicate with a star? A star is a vibratory frequency. And we already understand now that every vibratory frequency, which is light, which is memories, it contains data. So when you start being able to actually extract data from stars, not energy, because I know someone immediately was like, well, shoot, if the sun is there and we can get solar power, what kind of power can we get from other stars? And they're so dim. Exactly. It wouldn't be that kind of power, that raw power you're going to use to power a vehicle. It's actually data and information. And what you would have to do first, though, is you would have to put your vehicle in the condition that when you receive that information, that your vehicle just didn't go into all-out warfare with itself. You see what I mean? That's like when you talk about mental health, this is mental warfare going on. And it's the proponent is that the God that is in this realm right now, his name is war. So you go to work because that's war, W-O-R. They worship, W-O-R. So it becomes very easy to track beings, if you may, through the code, through just three-letter words, three-letter numbers, right? But I would still, or three-letter words and stuff like that. But I would suspect, because I've asked these things about even myself, like even, my name, James Evans Bomar III, because Sevan is just Evans with S moved in the front of it. But before that, people call me Sevan because I realize in Atlanta, the last thing you want is cats knowing your name. I'll pause for that. The last thing in line you want is cats know your name. So I was just like, look, just call me a number. So that way, right away, that ain't my name. Right. So then later on, I realized in my middle name that if the S was in front, that it was Sevan. And so I rolled with that, because at the end of the day, something will happen in the consciousness, and it will sometimes tell you that's, as Strayhorn probably have mentioned, that your middle name is what you can be. So they say that your first name is what you are. The middle name is what you can be, like you could float to it. And then your last name is what you were.
Damn,
right?
My middle name is Michael, man.
In other cultures, they got like 4 or 5 last names, but that's what it represents, right? Because it represents the lineage of the last name, right? But now you're carrying all of that, or you lost it. And so this is also the thing about where we're at right now with all of this, is that our relics have basically been hijacked. Our technologies have been stolen. And it looks like to us that the things that we should be using are actually the things that are creating bad things in the planet. That's pretty much what the narrative is right now, like pyramids and what all this means. As a simple concept, what a pyramid means is when you take all your energies and focus it into a point. And you need to learn how to do that anyway. It's called focus. So if you brought that into a external world and then created a chart for men to rule over each other and then said, that's what the pyramid is. And then everybody ran off and believed that, because that was like the top-down system that you would kind of visualize when there's like a hierarchical structure with the military. You see how it's like there could be a conflict of the definition of the maximum of the symbol, right? And then so this would then require you, because everybody is going to have an issue in the matrix with what you're doing as you're pushing through the matrix. So there's going to be people that it's kind of like that whole thing where they're trying to find something wrong with you. And people, to me, I'll be laughing at them because they don't understand I spend all day doing that, trying to find something wrong with me. So I'm like, yeah, help me, because I want to make sure that if there's anything out of alignment, that we got that thing in alignment, because that's how I know I stay in tune and I can keep receiving. So that's why when the transmission come in, because I'm going through my process through of healing, right? But I've learned to stop killing. I've learned how powerful that I can be when I really don't like something or someone or even whole nations. Because how powerful are you really? And that's why most people don't have any power, because if they get some power, they would just destroy us all.
Yeah.
Because we didn't bring them sandwiches or something, something petty. Like we act like we're not coming off of a clear past where people have had issues with power. They get a little bit of stuff and they're already trying to boss up over everybody. This is not the guy that you give control of the entire tribe to, right? So we have a situation because, see, in many ways, the beings that are lording over the reality, which are like dogs, they're like in themselves like what they call the master race. And a master race is more like how a dog will kind of corral sheep and corral goats. So it's not like it's smarter than the sheep or the goat. It just has a different demeanor and a way to corral and control. So you can see how genetically what's happening is that when you do get deep into the netherworld, because you were beginning this build today with reading off what is incorporated in the Isles of Osiris, which is basically where your heart is about to be raided and that your organs are going to come and testify against you. So these organs, which are the 7, right? They in themselves, they call themselves the archons. Okay, because they're the organs, right? And these systems themselves are in agreement. They agreed on Mount Harmon, which is where we get the word harmony from. And they agreed to do this thing. And what that means is that just how your heart and your lungs and your spleen and your kidney, and they all do different things, they all play a different tone or a different vibration, but they all work together to accomplish the great work, which is actually bringing you back to life from the Isles of the Dead, from the netherworld. Now, the netherworld was already known from deep times before the sun got here. That's why it says that the sun or the spirit itself was hovering over the waters of the deep. So the waters were already there. And in those waters, there was degrees in the netherworld. So these beings, what you would say is semi-aquatic, you would say them amphibian, you would say them even reptilian, also very vast, because generally when you're in a very large space and gravity is not interacting on you, you get big. Just like when you put certain fish in a bigger fish tank, they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so they get as big as a fish tank. Nobody has traversed the ocean because it's a galactic thing, like what you would call like a galactic law. Right. The cutoff is at the shore. And then when you get on the ocean, you're supposed to be a sovereign, because if you're on the water and you don't know how to produce what it is that you need, then you'll die out there. Also, you need to know how to navigate, because you'll get lost out there. So the ocean is the real outer space, okay? But the deep in itself and the entities in which that live in the deep, the way a person ends up arriving there is when the debts from their lives, where they're asking for a variety of things, and they're saying that they're willing to give something to receive that. So this is basically even the root itself of what we call magic, which is asking entities for things. This is why in the religion, which is the root of a lot of this, people are constantly asking this God for things, assuming that in the event that they receive it, that it doesn't want anything back. And in addition to that, they never catch that it's only until they're very fervent about asking what they need do they get it. And it's because it's with their own energy. That if you entreated for something, meaning you wanted something so bad that you just really sent out a vibration that I want it, the real want, not the, the real need. It gets into needs, right? When you can send out that kind of frequency, it'll happen because it happens on your own power. But many people, they subscribe partners, as it's called. They basically say, well, it was because of Jesus that I got this car. When really much of everything that was conducted, if not everything that was conducted to receive that, was done from the person's own energy. But there's a broker there. I got to get some water here in a minute. Now, this broker.
Take your time, brother. Take your time.
Because this is important. This broker, because it's what happened to the spiritual system. These brokers are like now the ones that are actually mastering these contracts and signing these contracts and creating these contracts, because what they do is they get between a person and their energy, basically. Your highest level or higher self, they kind of get in between you and your higher self, and they try to broker a deal between you and your higher self. Believe it or not, as silly as it sounds, it even sounds more silly when you imagine that we fall for it. And humanity will fall for giving their energy away to something else to receive something that will be less valuable than the value of the energy that they gave. So it's a bad deal. And that's really what it becomes to actually be a sovereign, is that you actually have to learn how to come into your life and basically be the Lord and the master of your life and stop subscribing to entities or idols. Now, this is interesting because there's a lot of idolization. But the reason why idolization to a god is forbidden is because it basically makes you send all your energy to something else. And if you're not familiar with what that is, we are supposed to be familiar with our ancestors, right? So when the connection with our ancestors is severed, we don't have to go to anything external to connect that, to reconnect that. We don't have to go to some statue that's supposed to be it, some name even that's supposed to be it. We only just, because it's not felt that way is what I'm saying. It can't be felt externally. This is also what happens when somebody dies, and why a lot of people can't communicate with somebody that died. It's because you never really knew them. You never sat there for hours and stared in their eyes.
Powerful.
We don't have intimate relationships like this anymore, because or divine pair, i.e. father, attempted to emanate without her counterpart, resulting in the creation of a flawed entity, often identified as the demiurge, aka the jackal in the Nomo tradition, also known as Yaldabaoth, who's also Samael or Sackless, Uncle Sam. In some cases associated with Yahweh, only in some cases when you figure out what YHVH means versus YHWH, right? It's just a slight of a little letter. This demiurge is ignorant of the Pleroma, considered itself the only God, and went on to create the material universe. Sophia, in realizing her mistake, falls into a state of grief and repentance. Her longing for reunion with the Pleroma results in the creation of the material world, where she becomes immanent and then entrapped and fragmented. That's the ocean. Humanity, in this Gnostic belief, carries a spark of the divine Sophia trapped in a material form. That's a spirit or water trapped inside of a body. 70% water, 30% flesh. And gnosis or knowledge is the path to realizing the divine spark, reuniting it with the Pleroma. Gnosis or knowledge unlocks the Kundalini from the Cossacks and allows it to make its journey back up through to make the cosmic cycle, or basically to regenerate, i.e. shed. However, it is crucial to remember in Gnosticism, it is not monolithic. So watch this, though. Let me see. It's one more part here that I want you to get before we move on. And this is how they literally explain to you that these beings are created without a male counterpart. And I'm going to show you this, the hebdomad. Give me 1 second here. Here we are. This is it right here. Let me see. Sophia's realizing her fellows in grief. Concept. Let me see. The concept jumping dangers farther. Boom, 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 boom. There's just one part here that I just didn't want to like have you taking my word for it. But it explains that Sophia creates these 9 beings. Let me just keep going through this here. And these 9 beings are created without the male counterpart. So in this, they lack that bloodlines and why they didn't really want intermingling and stuff. Because if you have implosive blue blood, you can control your dreams. So you can guide the waveform. You don't even have really a reflection in the mirror after a while. It's weird. They only show you vampires have it, right? But literally, as you begin to spin up, you begin to basically control your space and time and the field around you. So the son, and I'll just have to refer to him as that so it doesn't get confusing for people, or I could say the boy, he built his own system and he based it on the number 5. So instead of the number 6, which again is the Taurus and sex in union in that way, he built a number 5, which was in itself like missing one component. This is why there becomes 5 extra gods inside of Egypt. This is why the pentagram is so used everywhere. If you didn't notice, there's always pentagram in your face. This is also known as Big 5. And we'll get into this here in a moment, but we just need to understand the geometry, because the geometry is what's creating the realities. And the realities are within you. So you have this field, actually, this Taurus field, it is around you and it is going inside of you. Versus the pentagram is only sitting in your genitalia chakra because it was a creation. It was a cut. It was a way to bring another physical reality into existence, or i.e., turn a world inside out. So let's look at that. So it's now like, instead of just the creations that are coming from the great mother, from the emanations from the sky, remember she's hosting versus creating. We now have the sun who's pumped up an incubator. Okay. So remember, as above, so below happens all across time. So all the original beings, when they move, what they do ricochets across time. So even the pyramid is that incubator. It is an external, it encodes the language of phi. Phi is a pentagram. It is 360 degrees, or 72 degrees times 5 is 360 degrees. However, it is slightly off angle. We also know that the pyramid is in the same size or in ratio to the moon. The moon in ancient times and across all occultism is known as the ark, because in the moon is stored the DNA 2 by 2 of all of what is continuously being rebooted in the reality after the jackal took over the mainframe, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. So when the boy starts creating on the planet and it starts creating beings, that's when comes forth different kind of beings, primarily dogs. And I'm going to explain why here. So if you understand how this is rolling out on Earth, what you find is that the original beings are stronger. Their entire reality is actually hermetically sealed like the body is. But it's under pressure, just like different regions in the netherworld. Like if you were in the deep, deep ocean, imagine the pressure. And you need your own light, as most of the beings down there have. So the reality is that these beings that you're seeing around the circle actually make up the other life forms that you're seeing here on Earth through different blending processes. But one of them, which you see down here more around 5 o'clock, is the one that really starts the genetic manipulation as far as mixing the bloodline, because all of these beings, if they reach the stage of sentience in a sense to like that they're reasoning, they're already in a guild, if you may, that makes them preserve. So basically they only mate with their own. It's just like animal don't go mate with giraffe, don't go mate with elephant. Okay. That's the perfect way of explaining this, to not get into any kind of racist dichotomies. So the only one that actually starts the process of blending and mixing is actually the being at 5 o'clock, who's also known as Oannes, John the Baptist. We learn he's beheaded. We learn his head becomes the head of the Knights Templar. We learn that he really starts the Jesuits as they are, which is still why they wear the mitre hat. And everything around the masculine teachings all come from Oannes himself, or Ea, or a god of the ocean. So in reality, we find that there are many quote unquote gods, because to lesser beings, it's just anything that's more powerful than them. So oftentimes the ancestors or the people who lived on the planet saw the gods as the weather. They saw the gods as monsters that they had witnessed in the ocean. And then there was a specific area which sits somewhere around, like right where you see Italy, that whole area in the Vatican, where this particular being was constantly coming out of the water and teaching a specific group of men. So let's kind of recenter here real quick and make sure that we're not like getting ahead of like comprehending what's happening. So continuously happening, because see, the thing is, and that's why I love when Brother Rich named it Infinity Matrix. I was like, man, I know we're going to do this, because that's exactly what it is. Because every time any kind of soul, I don't care how large it is, precipitates, which I call the participation, meaning you die, technically, your soul comes up out of your body like an ember. And it goes to make its place in the stars. And depending upon how bright it is, it determines the magnitude of how it comes back, because we keep coming back, or forward, as I always say, depending upon what direction you're going in. This is how the quote unquote reincarnation works. This is why it's always good to be in good standing with the Great Mother, because ultimately she's the only one that can really regulate in the deep. See, because